Now? Okay.
And we're live with Season 3, Episode 2 of Wire 106.
That's right, we are. And interesting episode. Jessica, is this the first time you've joined us on the Wire 106 live discussions, or the second?
Second time.
Yeah.
Yep, I did the first one way back when. So.
Remember, you were inaugural.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
We've come a long way since that first time, let me tell you.
I bet.
We're like German. Precision, on time, every moment accounted for, as you can tell right now.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so one of the things we're going to do today is we're going to actually share some elements of this particular show, episode 2, which let's talk about two things. Let's talk about the title, and let's talk about the epigraph right away, because that's always a good way to start conversation.
Okay. The title is All Due Respect.
Absolutely. And I have so you put together, Paul, if I'm right, a little kind of video share of all the times that happens. Is that
Well,
right?
I clipped the 3 spots where it said.
Okay, good. So you want me to play that video now?
We could start with the first one, yeah.
Okay, so let's start with the first one. Give me 1 second. Okay, this works. I'm professional. Everything will be absolutely perfect. And here we go.
Hey, yo, Omar. Yo, all due respect, but this right here is a Barksdale joint, man.
Damn.
Yeah, it's a great moment, and it's also Chris Hooks has already been talking about mashing up The Wire and Downton Abbey. This is like a perfect example of it, like Omar sitting in his old chair was saying, "Oh, pray do tell." So, what do you think of this one?
I loved this opening scene. It was one of the screenshots I took, actually. So, like, honestly, I didn't even need to watch the rest of the episode. This, like, just sold it for me. So, because Omar is just so clever, and I think that whole entire scene where he's, like, in disguise and then just kind of comes in and they, like, basically take down the apartment, just them two, in 2 seconds, just shows how he works in his style. So, and I love how, like, Avon's guys are like kind of warning him, like, hey, this is a Barksdale, place, and he just doesn't care. He's like, well, yeah, that's like why I'm here.
Tends to tell, like, dripping with, like, sarcasm. Like,
Yeah.
like, I had no idea.
Yeah.
Well, they probably have no idea that Omar has a thing for Barksdale.
That's right.
Yeah.
In particular right now, because Barksdale's behind. And so there's an ongoing back and forth chess game between Stringer and Omar that's starting to emerge, and it has been since the end of season 2.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, and I wasn't even sure if Omar was gonna like go back and try to, mess around with Stringer, but so I was really glad to see that he actually is still doing that, because I feel like he really does have unfinished business. So.
Yeah, and it's also in this episode that, Stringer, he's having his corporate business meetings still at the funeral house.
Yeah.
And one of the questions or results is double down, right? Double down on muscle. Let's push this to the limits. And it's pretty clear that this is going to come back. We have not heard the last of Omar raiding Barksdale.
Yeah. Now, the second example of the title of the episode actually comes from that scene as well.
So, which one is that?
I believe it's
05?
Yeah, 05, I believe.
And I'll play that right now. So here's the second instance of All Due Respect, which is actually the title of this episode. And let's see. Yeah.
I mean, he called you by name, String. I mean, all due respect, but dude, like, unless you step to him, it's gonna be like this.
Yeah, so that's the board meeting.
Yeah. I like that Robert's Rules of Order thing in there too.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Like they have the book, and it's like Webster's New World. Robert's. I mean, that whole scene in episode 2, now 3, with the kind of corporate boardroom that Stringer's trying to create, and, Stringer's relationships well beyond the street. It's just brilliant. It's a brilliant development.
I always find them like, I mean, I find them funny, but I also kind of find them awkward because it's like he's trying to make this like a legitimate business, but it's never going to be because they're selling drugs. So it's just like, it's like a faux business. It's really weird.
Was it in episode 1 when there's this real tension between Avon and Stringer about, go through Prop Joe,
Mm-hmm.
try and kind of hit hands or bump fists on the window, and it doesn't really, there's no authenticity there. There's deep questions between the two. And I think that's Avon's point exactly, Jessica. It's like, you're not going to have. This business is all about the street.
Mm-hmm.
Supply and demand, Reagan economics.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, that was like Avon's like, Stringer, this isn't one of your, college classes. So it's like, it's true. It's not, because you can't turn this into like a real business. It's just never gonna happen.
Yeah, but I mean, you could argue. I'll take devil's advocate there, Jessica.
Okay.
You could argue people like John F. Kennedy's father,
Mm-hmm.
the big-time bootlegger,
Mm-hmm.
earned a completely illegitimate business, and so many illegitimate businesses during the kind of the moment when I'm forgetting the Prohibition,
Mm-hmm.
major kind of money making. And some of them were, Capone and completely illegitimate, and some of them made that move, and they were smart enough, and they had the right connections that they could. And I think this season, that's exactly what Stringer's trying to do. Whether he's successful or not is yet to be seen, but there is a real connection between trying to move beyond the street that does seem impossible, and I think your point still stands. But the idea is, businesses are run like this. Like, the idea of businesses as being corrupt and potentially bloodthirsty or of the street is not completely a ludicrous relationship.
Yeah.
Watching him over these 3 seasons trying to move on, it kind of raises some of those questions.
Yeah, and it goes back to something that was said like back in season 1 between D'Angelo and McNulty that the police they don't care so much about the drugs as the people getting killed. And if you take that out of the equation, as Stringer's trying to do, as Prop Joe says, keep it boring,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
It doesn't legitimize his business, but
and it's true, and I don't know. I mean, I think, in fact, maybe you have maybe Jessica, maybe you're right. I mean, Stringer's fact that you could ever treat this like a legitimate business is insane. But think about the legitimacy of it, at least in complete dark ops way, like in the 80s with the Sandinistas and Reagan, and them funneling all this drug money. Like, it is big business.
Mm-hmm.
The idea that it's not big business is insane, and it has a place. It's just they're at the lowest rung of the ladder.
Yeah.
It's like String is recognizing that and trying to pull himself out. And I think what's cool is how difficult that is just on a personal level.
Mm-hmm.
How much goes with that? So I don't know. I'm not being clear about any of this, but
yeah.
Okay. All due respect. Want to see the third one?
Sure.
Okay.
Ready? So here's the third example. Is there another example, or is this the last one?
I think it's just those 3. This is between the 2 politicians.
All due respect, Councilman. You're fucking with me because what? You're bored?
That's awesome.
Yeah, so that's what all due respect is about. It's interesting that it comes like in, it cuts across, all the different levels of society there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And it also comes into a point where you have Burrell and um, congressman talking politics, right? Like talking this notion of him being bored and he's basically using Burrell as his stepladder to success. And there's that kind of same thing we were talking about with String shows up here between these two, and that tension and struggle around, because the idea behind Carcetti is it's impossible for him to even dream of becoming mayor. Yet ultimately that's his goal.
Yeah.
So there's an impossibility not unlike that of Stringer, although he doesn't play in some ways just as dirty and just as problematic as drug dealers, although in different ways, and he's not leaving bodies on the street, so I don't want to make that I don't want to make such a strong comparison. It's a little bit dangerous, but I think you know what I'm talking, right?
Yeah.
All right, what's next?
Well, I thought Cheese was really cool during this this episode, and so I have two screenshots of him that are like very similar. The first one is this one where he's holding his dog, and he's clearly like distressed, and he's very upset about losing his dog. And then the other one is similar expression, but it's when he's in the interrogation room with McNulty and Bunk, if you can see that one right there.
Yeah.
And they're talking about, this is after Bunk has, basically like repeated his lines that they got on the wire tap. And it's about like how like, he's upset that he's like lost his dog and whatever. And they think that it's, like one of his like crew or something like that. They don't understand that it's like an actual dog, like an animal. And so that was just hilarious in of itself. But then, the fact that, Cheese is so upset over this dog, and it's interesting because on the one hand, he entered his dog into this dog fight, and that's never a good idea, and especially since I'm a dog lover, so I had an issue with this. But he was really upset about it, so it's kind of like, well, then why did he even bother to enter him into this fight when there's a good chance, 50-50 chance his dog is going to lose and get injured. But it was kind of like the other guy from season 1 that had all the fish. I'm like blanking on his name right now. But yeah, Bay, yeah, he loves the fish. And so like all of these pretty kind of like ruthless guys don't mind killing people, but they are like traumatized when their animals die. So
isn't that like a cultural truth though? Like we love animals. Like we can deal with being killed in any episode, but kill an animal, everything's over.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting because I feel like it shows that these people aren't like psychopaths, because usually like people that are psychopaths will like kill animals for fun. So like they're just like in a very messed up environment, and I don't think they're actually bad people at heart. So because they have some sort of morals clearly, especially when it comes to like empathy.
Two things about at least the first picture I found really striking was how noir-like Cheese looked.
Mm-hmm.
Hat, and he had the cigarette coming out. I mean, he looked really like he could be out of a 1940s movie. I really like that kind of visual you caught. The other thing is just the language there. The idea that they're listening in, and this is when they have the wire still up, and it's I dropped the dog or whatever he talks about. He has a particular way of saying how he killed the dog, and he watched them there bleeding, and they're like, "Oh my God, Cheese,
Yeah.
we got it," and the slang just fails them.
Yeah.
Like calling the gun a whistle. When they first said, like, "Where's my whistle?" I was like, "Whistle? Like what? Like a real whistle?" But now they were talking about the gun, and it's interesting. So another interesting moment here would be to track the changes and just wow, different things meaning different things to different people. And this was almost like a Three's Company episode, where it was just a very simple like miscommunication drives the whole episode, and that's a very rare thing. It was almost like a sitcom in that.
Yeah.
Thing, which I found interesting.
Yeah, well, like, it's funny how some of the Wire episodes are a lot more intense, and there's only, like, a few little, like, comedic reliefs. But this one seemed to have a lot more, like, especially with this other scene that I'll share, which was probably the second or first funniest scene in the entire thing. It's just they ended up getting really like self-aware that like like cops and criminals both go to the movie theater and then they run into each other. And then it's just so funny how the cops are really awkwarded out and they don't know how to respond, but the other guys are just like super cool with it and they're like, see you tomorrow, because they probably will stop them tomorrow.
Yeah, it worked. It's brilliant.
Mhm.
In the commentary, person who wrote this, Richard Price, famous crime novelist, he wrote Clockers, and Simon was a fan of Price's work, and one of the things that he really loved was Clockers, which was a show about inner city crime in New York and about the projects and about these kids who find themselves in these kind of compromised situations. But he talked about plagiarizing this very scene with the two at the movies from Clockers because David Simon was such a fan of Clockers. So actually, a different version of that same scene shows up in Richard Price's earlier work. I think it was his 1995 film based on his novel, where this same scene comes up, which I thought was awesome. It's cool because you nailed it, Jessica. He talks about these little strange moments of where he finds the street most interesting and the whole narrative most interesting. Not in the big numbers, not in the politics, but in these awkward moments. And these kids don't care. Like you said, for them it's just another moment. Like, hey, Hurt, that must be Mrs. Hurt. And jumping with them, and they're all flabbergasted. It's another part of the game. It's just awesome.
Well, yeah, and it's just like, it's a good reminder that like everyone is human too. It doesn't matter if you're a drug dealer or a cop, like you have lives outside of those spheres.
I agree. And how struck the corner boys are to think that they could actually have wives and go to a movie, right? Like that for them, it's just, oh my God, I thought you were just always 24/7 pricks, right? Like that's all you did is bust out jobs.
Yeah. Well, it's like when you're little and you see like a teacher at the grocery store. Because I used to thought like teachers just like slept at school when I was really little. So, they don't do anything else.
Right. That's all they are to you. That's awesome.
Yeah.
The dynamic between the two of them in that scene was kind of interesting. Like, to the police, the corner boys, that's like the enemy, like sort of like a military enemy. Whereas to Bodhi and Poot there, the police are like the other team, they're all in the game. It's just the other side. Like, that level of enmity isn't there.
Right.
Yeah, and it shows up funny. Like, I mean, Bodhi, Hurt, and Carver have a long history now. I mean, 2 seasons ago, they were beating them up on the pool table, and then they were playing pool, and they captured that dynamic really well. And it's just kind of developing over time.
Well, yeah, and even when they take Poot this time in this episode, at the end, like Poot's just like, "Can I go now?" Like he doesn't even care that like they've taken him off like over in handcuffs or whatever, because he knows like the drill at this point. So and he knows they can't take him in on anything because they don't actually have anything like associated with him. So
it's interesting again. I mean, this is a side note, but it's interesting just how much they're schooled in the law, and they understand the tactics of fear, and they're not taken by it. Like, because that's part of the game, right? It's like. Not at all going to roll over on anyone, not scared in this episode when he's being, you already showed the scene, the clip from that scene, the same way. And there's kind of like an early schooling in the kind of tactics of terror and how to negotiate those tactics, which is really interesting. Yeah, right? I love that scene, by the way. That was awesome. Keep coming.
Okay, so I guess like when you were talking about like tactics of terror, another one that like spoke to me was the kid with the kids, and like they're at, I guess it's like the morgue or something, and the doctor or surgeon guy like shows them the heart, like the really messed up heart, and I'm like, these are little kids that are probably very innocent, and now you're just scaring them half to death like with this dead body here. And like I don't even know how effective it is. So
Jimmy McNulty's there, right? and they
Yeah.
suddenly leave, and not morgue, what would you call it? What would be the name of the person doing the
Medical examiner.
medical examiner
But,
comes,
okay.
and he said, "Scared straight." That's what Jimmy said, and I think what has he said? No, more like
Board stiff.
Well,
Yeah.
yeah.
just, there's no sense of like this is at all effective. It's just over the top, faces of death almost, like this ridiculous, scare technique that's going to have no impact on these kids' lives. In fact, it's just going to give them something to laugh about. That's a really
Well, yeah, because it's just so dramatic. Like it's not. They aren't putting it into like they're not trying to make their message relevant to the kids' lives at all. They're just like, here's this really scary thing. It's like field trip that we're gonna take you on.
I mean, there's a long history of this, and I'm sure you've had it, Jessica, when you've gone to school. Like, I know I had it when I was at school. I lived in Long Island, and we had a railroad station. And the railroad, kids would play on it. There were the regular tracks, and then there was what was called the third rail, which was electrified. So if you touched it at the wrong time, you would get electrocuted.
Mm-hmm.
They would bring us into an auditorium. There were like 300 kids. And they would put up this insane 15-minute movie on a 16 and they would show a kid climbing up the hill, going on, and then touching the third rail, and then going on fire. And then he was just a thing of ashes. And it was so over the top. And it was so over the top that we would laugh at it. And the teachers would get mad, and the administration would get mad. But they had no idea that so much of the effectiveness of teaching and of learning and of thinking about this stuff is in the subtleties. And it's the same with how they teach the web now and everything. It's just that this overblown fear and horror that's it's not that effective.
Yeah, well, I mean, I remember in high school we had like a whole like day dedicated to like, being responsible when we turn 21 and we are allowed to start drinking. And they showed this like video of some guy that was super drunk. He was in a mall and fell off an escalator. First of all, just don't go to the mall. Like, stay inside, like, in your home if you're going to get really drunk. But he falls off the escalator and then, has to get, like, brain surgery because he fell on his head. And then they show, like, the brain surgery. And I'm like, okay, first of all, this doesn't happen to everyone. And this person was really dumb anyways. So I don't know what the point of this movie is. It's just really terrifying.
Really bad.
Yeah.
I also wonder how much that relates to if there's a political undertone there with Bush's shock and awe. Right?
Yeah.
There was the whole notion that when they went into Iraq, it was all about shock and awe, shock and awe. Just let everyone see all the explosions in Iraq and all the things happening, and that it was basically going to make the case. And obviously it was completely ineffective. Right? The work was happening with the insurgencies and with the war that was happening quietly in these various towns like Fallujah, and the shock and awe was just basically a show.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
I wonder how that maps onto that.
Well, yeah, because isn't The Wire from like 2000s? So.
Right now, 2004. This is right after the
Okay.
invasion.
Yeah.
They're probably making this right as that's happening.
Okay. So yeah, then that would make perfect sense.
Yep, it would.
Yeah.
That's a really good point on my part. How do you like that, Jessica? Self-congratulation is part of this. Okay, what next?
So kind of something else that has been tying in through all the different episodes was the fact that like everyone cheats on each other. And this is just, it's not even like part of the main plot, but it's like all these little like side plots, because we see that everyone has been struggling like with their like personal relationships. And so you see that with Cedric, he gets with the lawyer who's been like with every cop, I'm assuming by now. And then like we also see like Kima kind of struggling, and so I got a screenshot of her like when I don't think she does anything, but she's sitting at the bar and she's looking over at like, this attractive girl. And so I'm sitting there like, oh my gosh, another one is going to cheat? Are you kidding me? Like, can anyone stay faithful on the show? But, so I'm hoping she didn't actually pursue anything. She just needed to, like, get her head sorted out. Because I know she's obviously been having a hard time with having this kid around.
Yeah.
So it's very interesting how they kind of tie in people's like personal lives back into like the main plot, and like because like Freeman, is like, oh, like you can go home, Kima, like go enjoy like your time with your kid and stuff. And it's only one line, but it has this whole major effect on her, and it changes the way that she behaves throughout the rest of the show. So.
And the other thing is, Kima was one of our innocents.
Mhm.
There's a special space for her because she, in first season 1,
Mhm.
she was a little bit quieter, but she was still an innocent, and this is a potential flaw for her.
Right, yeah. Well, and the audience has like fallen in love with her because, she survives the bullet shot, she seems like she can do no wrong, and then all of a sudden she's like kind of wavering now. So that was something that I thought was intriguing, but also potentially really annoying.
Killing all your heroes, Jessica.
Yeah. I mean, I already know that there is no like one good or bad person on this show because everyone's so complex, but I'd like to have at least one person, take the high road.
Exactly.
So yeah. And it also kind of ties in with like the new guy. I don't remember his name, but he just got out of prison who was serving 14 years.
Cuddy.
Cuddy, okay. Yeah, so he like, he's like trying to find an actual like legitimate job, and he goes to that like career counselor, and he's like, just get any kind of job. So he ends up like, doing the day labor. And I thought that was a great move for him, not going back into like the whole drug circle, especially since the one time he tried it out, it didn't work out for him. So I was like, good, and like one person who's trying to reform themselves for once.
Well, reform is right on because that's really the theme, right? This season is
Mhm.
all about reform. It's about, reform that Colvin's going to try and bring with this brown paper bag for drugs.
Yep.
Putty getting out of prison. Stringer Bell trying to reform the image of himself and his whole crew. It's absolutely the mayor trying to reform, the city.
Mhm. Yeah, well, and that just goes into like, as we already kind of talked about a little bit, like the very end scene where, he's talking about like how drugs, have never been in a paper bag. And so of course I got a screenshot of that because it was so iconic. And it's true if you think about it, like there really has been no paper bag for drugs. And so like what if there were a paper bag for drugs? And then would the cops be able to ignore it better? So I don't know. I guess we're gonna have to see how everyone takes, his speech, because I feel like Carver and Hook are gonna definitely have, or Carter and Hook are definitely gonna have a hard time with that. So because that's like what they do is they go over and they like, somewhat harass these guys where they don't have like the actual drugs in their hands, and so they can't really bring them in. But they love doing that. They love shaking them up. So if they're being
But
told not to now, what are they gonna do?
And I think you're right. I think Colvin's speech about this, like Dozerman was shot over 3 vials, right? Like it's just meaningless. And I think central at this speech is not only, what's going to happen in this season, this episode about reform, but a broader, real indictment of this ongoing drug war, where there's been no paper bag and there's been no relief, and the communities get hit the hardest are the ones that have the least.
Mhm.
There's a kind of really a centralization of this whole notion of reform around the drug war to a broader kind of, decades-long war on our poorest people in the country, which is a
Mhm.
really interesting kind of commentary beyond even just the episode.
Mhm. Well, yeah, and it just kind of plays into that idea, like okay, actually, like drugs are hurting people, but like theoretically, if they weren't hurting people, then why does it matter? Why are we putting so much time and effort into this when we have other things going on, like actual homicides? So.
Or is the investment that you're spending on, prison, policing,
Mhm.
and all that better than saying on rehabilitation, on education,
Mhm.
on social services to deal with this? I mean, there's different ways to invest your money and how you fight.
Mhm.
And the battle has just been crucial around questions of long sentences, extremely brutal policing.
Mhm.
It's been a pretty one-sided war up until this point. And I think that's what's
Mhm.
awesome about Colvin is stepping in, like he's intervening. This is his hoorah.
Mhm. Well, yeah, and like even like the way they've been fighting has been really inconsistent because they gave that one guy 14 years, and then Avon like is probably gonna get out, because he just gave some information up and like barely served any kind of sentence whatsoever. And so, I mean, I think it's like if they start, putting the drugs in a paper bag, at least then it'll be consistent, hopefully.
The Maury Levy figure really highlights just if you are in the drug racket, how much money and a lawyer makes a difference.
Mhm.
How many of people just can't afford that, or I mean, it's a very interesting indictment of like the justice system too, along the line.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and like Omar calls out Levy, saying like that he is in the game too. He's playing his part as well because he's helping all those drug dealers, get off their sentences and whatnot. So I thought that was really cool too. So it all kind of ties together.
Yeah, it does. And
Mhm.
he just carries a briefcase, right?
Mhm.
Not a shotgun.
Right. Yeah. And in some ways, it's more powerful. So.
Yeah, that was awesome, Jessica.
Mhm. Yeah.
Paul, I know you
Yeah.
have more that you want to share here.
Um,
I'm interested. Let me actually
yeah.
focus. I'm interested in your discussion about Avon versus Stringer. You brought this up before when you were talking to each other in the prison, and you're
Yeah.
sharing another couple of screenshots about what we see when we look at them talking to each other. You want me to share those two, or you can share them? You have them.
Yeah, I can do those. Let's see.
I'm interested in that. I wanted to see what you were thinking about.
When we look at Avon, let me bring this up. Um, I don't know how well this is showing through on the video. Um, he's showing up very clear, even though we're looking at him through a screen, through a glass window.
Mhm.
There's actually some shots in this conversation where it looks like the screen is behind him.
Yeah.
You know,
Absolutely.
and I think it's just sort of foreshadowing. We know he's getting out, and it's sort of like showing him moving out from that being trapped behind bars, behind the screen. Um, but if we look at the other side of the conversation with Stringer here, where'd my thing go? Um, he's a little more cloudy. We see Avon's reflection in front of him. You
Mhm.
kind of see the screen is more present in his picture. Like he's caught behind something and he's got Avon in front of him. And that's, I think,
Mhm.
foreshadowing some things that are going to be coming up as well.
And it,
Yeah.
it hurts the relationship in season 2.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Avon was very cloudy behind that kind of glass
Yeah.
and the wiring within it, and Avon Stringer was clear. And
Yeah.
that's returning to that same shot. It's different now. Avon's
Yeah.
getting out. Stringer's got a lot. He's hiding from Avon. All his
Yeah.
investments, all his business moves. There's a lot. The shit's gonna hit the fan.
Yeah. Yeah. In the previous one, Avon was sort of like obscured by the wires, and they were really prominent, I believe, in that scene.
Mhm.
Um, because Stringer was doing all these things behind his back. I think that was like right around the time he put the hit on D'Angelo.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's interesting. I mean, that it really comes clear in those two shots because when you were talking about that and I was rewatching the episode, I really saw how invisible those lines were when it came to Avery. And I don't know
Yeah.
if they did something special with the camera, but you're right. It's as if the lines were behind him and he was already out. And
Mhm.
talking about, look, man, I'm basically gone. I'll be out before winter. Like, I'll be out before it gets cold. And you can see
Mhm.
Ringer's like, oh shit, really? You're gonna come out that soon? Oh, that was good.
Yeah.
Really detailed reading. I like it.
Yeah. There was one other shot. This guy, let me bring him up. Um, this guy shows up in this episode. and he becomes more of a, he's still a bit player, you
Mhm.
know, throughout the whole series. But this is, the actor's name is Melvin Little. I think in the series he's just a deacon. I don't know if he ever actually has a name. Um, but this guy was sort of like the inspiration or the template that Simon used for Avon Barksdale. Um, and I actually found some articles talking about it. I tried to find the Baltimore Sun articles that Simon wrote, but they're not online anywhere. Um, yeah, so Melvin Little was like a big time, you know, drug kingpin in his day, and that's where Simon got to know him. And when he was out of prison, he sort of like brought him into the series.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I mean, part of that whole, there's a couple of things going on. You have that going on with like Omar and Butchie, Deacon, and I guess who comes to Deacon Colvin. You have
Hmm.
what's his name, Marlowe going to this guy where it's in a rim store, and
Yeah.
you have these relationships, right? And there's this moment in this episode, I think, when one of the guys who cheated cheese on the dog fight,
Hmm.
they come up and they shoot him from behind.
Hmm.
He's talking about Bumpy Johnson, who was a big time New York City gangster. And listening to Richard Price talk about Bumpy Johnson, who knows about him, this is a guy who was like feared for 40 years. From the 20s to the 60s, he worked for the mob, but he basically owned Harlem. And he was probably the most feared man for 40 years. And it's just interesting how some of the history of crime and some of the kind of the longitudinal history over time as it changes. You know, they'll talk about the French Connection at times. They'll talk about Bumpy Johnson. It's really embedded very subtly into this series. A whole history of you know, where this kind of drug crime and crime in general and how it's evolved over time. And I'm really
Hmm.
interested in that. And listening to Richard Price, he put that in there very focusedly. There's another moment where he's saying that he put in, when Colvin comes and reports back to the folks about how Bozeman's doing. No, it's not them. It's another moment in this episode when one of the guys who's done this unbelievable paperwork, he refers to him as the Dutchman, which is actually, or no, not as the Dutchman. There's a particular thing he refers to him. I don't have the quote right, but he was basically using him as a frame for a New York City gangster in like the 40s and 50s, right? I forget the name of it. It's something like Dutch,
Dutch
but
Schultz.
Dutch Schultz. And so he was actually referring to this guy with an offhanded reference to a 1940s gangster from New York. And it's just that embedded illusion that you completely miss. And like Richard Price is putting in there, and I would completely miss if he hadn't pointed out. But it's just fascinating how much of that stuff is in there.
Hmm.
Yeah, there's a lot of blurring, you know, between the real and the fictional, you know, and bringing in people like Melvin Little, um, Jay Landsman, you know, sort of underscores that or reinforces it.
Hmm.
Yeah, I love that. And the Jay Landsman, who's Colvin's right-hand man.
Yeah.
The real Jay Landsman, who's played by the actor who plays Jay Landsman. Yeah, it's such a weird. The other thing I thought that was interesting that Richard Price said, um, they were looking at the corner boys in the scene where Bodie comes up and tries to talk to Marlowe, and Marlowe is just basically like playing with the golf stick. He wants golf club. He wants nothing to do with it. And Richard Price, as a writer, said one of the things that people like me and David Simon, whether we like it or not, have to come to terms with TV and with film in general is that it's a visual medium. And maybe even more than the writing, the faces of these individuals who are acting that matters. And he noted that that's one of the things he really loved about The Wire was that the people who were in the show were not like Robert Redford or Robert De Niro or you name it, like Sigourney Weaver. Like they were people who were just basically from that area and whose faces. So some of them were big time actors, who became big time actors, but most of them were just kind of whether it be journeyman actors or completely new actors or maybe character actors, but their faces told the story that so much of the writing, as good as the writing was, and what's amazing is he's kind of saying we are as writers, it's actually the visual elements of these people and then playing the role that really makes the show, which I think was a pretty interesting admission for a writer to kind of come and come clean about like where he thinks his role is in visual for like media, TV or film. So I found that compelling, even though I think the writing is what makes the show in some ways. The visual part, he's giving it a lot of credit.
Hmm.
Struck by that.
Yeah.
Anything else?
Nope, I have to get back to work soon, actually, at 4.
Let's
All right. All right.
All right, guys. Jessica, thanks for taking the time.
Yeah, no, thank you.
All right, guys.
All
Paul's
right.
the side.
All right. I'll
Bye-bye.
sign off.
Bye.